Hey everybody, Fail Machine here. Today, I'm going to show you how to create that iconic sound using nothing but Ableton stock plugins and sounds. So if you're using Ableton Live, you can do this, you can follow along, you can figure it out. I'm going to talk about how this works. If you're lazy and you don't want to follow along, I'll leave a link in the description where you can download the drum rack, the audio effect group for the gated reverb, and some samples of what we did today. So let's get started. So most people don't know this, but that quintessential 80s drum sound all pretty much comes from the Lindrum drum machine from the 80s. It was used on a lot of old school records. Tears for Fears, Pet Shop Boys, Prince. There's a lot of iconic sound that comes out of the Lindrum, and Ableton actually comes with a Lindrum pack. Yeah, it's got that. So we'll go over into Ableton here and we'll click on drums, and we've got 606s, 808s, 909s. The 707 was used a bit, so if you want to experiment with that, but we're going to go down here to LD Core Kit, which stands for Lindrum Core Kit, and we're just going to pop that on this first track. So if we listen to these sounds, yeah, so it's super dry. But this, believe it or not, is going to sound like your favorite 80s track here when we're done. So what really made that sound was a gated reverb sound. We've got our LD Core Kit here, and first thing I'm going to do is we're gonna focus on that snare, because that snare sound is really the sound, and we're gonna shape it from the snare, and then we're gonna transfer this stuff to the other sounds. But we're gonna grab the snare and we're gonna click on the snare, and now we can see we can put stuff in line with the snare inside the snare group. We can also come up here and we can click on snare here, and then we've got all the effects that are on the snare. We'll just work from here so we don't too much of an issue. Confusing, people put it outside of the effect. Anyway, we're just gonna expand this out, go to the snare, and then we're gonna go to the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna grab a reverb. I'm not a big fan of Ableton stock reverb, so if you can go get something like Valhalla Vintage Verb or basically anything other than this, it'll be much better. But we're gonna do this with just stock plugins. So the reverb now, this is what it sounds like. Meh. So, but what we want to do is we want to increase the decay time to something just outrageous, like 12 seconds. It's going to take 12 seconds for that to go away. And then we're going to use a gate to clamp that down. So click on this, Apple G, Control G, whatever, put it into a group. You can also right click on it and click group. It'll group it so that we have this here. Right click in here, create a new chain. We're going to call this Verb, and we're going to call this dry. So this is sort of my cheapo, lame-o way of doing effect sends without actually using the effect sends. I mean, you technically have inside of here, inside of a drum rack, you have these effect sends, but you end up just sending 100% of the signal to it anyway. So I just don't use it. I do it this way. And this is actually useful for more than just doing the gated reverb. So the other trick is I like to have everything come out in unity gain. So I will map the dry and the verb wet to a single channel, and we'll do -3 dB as the max for these. And for the dry channel, the minimum should be 0 dB. So now what happens is if I'm at 0 on this volume here, we'll just call this wet. If I'm at 0 here, it's completely dry, and we have 0 coming out the dry. So this comes out. So all the signals coming out of this dry side, nothing's going to the verb side. So this effectively works like a send. But if I were to go to 100% and put 0, 0 on both, this would be much louder, or not much louder, it'd be perceptibly louder. And I don't want to have more volume when I add more things. So as I get closer to the 127 here, the full forward, I need to pull the verb and the dry back a little bit. Dry, wet, up. So if we look here, so that's sort of a trick that I do often. If you have a full dry wet signal like this, you might not want to do that. But if you're going to be mixing things together, this sort of gives you it's a way to adjust it so that, and -3 dB is just kind of like a rule of thumb. But the idea here is that we're going to get the same volume output when we have everything mixed in as we do when we mix it all, when we want to go straight to the dry signal. And so you're going to have to play with what those amounts are depending on what you have in the chain. But all right, now that we've gotten completely off track, let's move back to this. So now we've got this sound, which is not what we want. I mean, it's ambient as hell, but whatever. So now we're going to grab a gate, and we're going to come over here, and we're going to go to gate. And we're going to put a gate in front of the verb. No, gate after the verb. Yeah, you're going to want to gate the verb afterwards. So now we have this gate. Now if we hit this, we can set this threshold down here. I'm going to set the hold time and the release time up a little bit. Let's see here. Open up the return time. But it doesn't open, even though the attack is like way low, it's still delayed, right? It's not going to work. But you're kind of starting to hear it now. Still not right. So what we need to do is we need to click the sidechain and go to our kit and go to the whatever channel we're on. Right now we're on the snare channel, so we want to go to the snare channel pre-effects. So now it'll open when I hit the snare. And there's the sound, right? So the idea here is the sidechain opens the gate, and then the gate closes it down. Now, still in the background, it's ringing like a mofo back there, right? But the gate is making it disappear. That's pretty much our sound, right? So another thing that I like to do is I like to map a couple of these parameters. So I want to map the hold. I want to map the release. And I'm going to map the threshold. So now I've got those parameters in here. Now I can just close this. So this is basically the sound we want. And let me just get a sort of MIDI clip, and we'll just put a snare on every beat so we can hear this. All right, so now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to adjust the threshold. Helps to actually be able to see what's happening. And I'm going to adjust the release time. All right, so there's our sound. Now what's happening here is the gate is getting opened by the trigger of the sound. So the attack doesn't really matter at this point. You want to keep the attack down at 0, and I'm not sure what happens when it doesn't care. So just keep the attack down as low as it goes. The hold time is how long we get the full signal before the gate starts to close when the signal drops below the floor. So the signal drops below the floor pretty quickly. Right, so it drops below that floor. Once it drops below the floor, once it drops here, right, so the drops below that floor, we have the hold time of 106 milliseconds, right? So the longer I hold that, the longer it's going to sit before it triggers the release. So that's the sustain if you're a synth person. And then the release time is obviously how long it takes for that tail to come off. You're going to want to tune the release time to the tempo of your song, right? So if we've got a long release time, it's going to smatter together. But if I have a short release time, sometimes if the song is playing slow, right? So if I'm playing, so if I were playing this, we're playing kind of slow. It's a little too tight, so I would just open the release just so that it releases just before the next beat. Make sense? Of course it does. All right. So now we've got that. Now this is pretty much there. So I would close this, and I'll make this effect rack. We'll call this gated verb. Now the trick is though, whenever you open, or whenever you, we'll leave this open like this when we save it. Whenever you put this on a sound or a track, you're going to want to go over to the sidechain and set the sidechain so that it's sidechaining to itself. Ableton's not really good at this, like selecting. I wish there was like a macro or something that'd say just use whatever you're on, whatever. So if you use this, it'll be in the description below. You can download it. Just make sure you set the sidechain, otherwise it's going to do wonky stuff. All right, so we can just go ahead and close this down. So now we've got gated verb. And I mean, the other thing we can do is we just copy this, go over to the kick, and drop it here. And again, so if I without it, it does nothing. But we go to here and we go to the kick pre-effects. And now, and that's a lot, so we might want to pull the amount down a little bit. And I don't talk about if you're going to use verb on a gated verb on a bass, what you should do, or on a kick drum. I'll show you in a second. So we'll go back to the snare. Snare is really wonky now. It's not wonky. It's really boxy because of that verb. So what we want to do now is we're going to go to the audio effects and let's grab an EQ8. I'll drop an EQ8 on there. I like to open it up. And we're just going to play that loop and we're going to fix some stuff here. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a low pass. And the best way to do the EQing of like a low pass filter is to go like way high and then pull it open, or I guess open it up until you hear everything you want to hear. It sounds like normal again. I want to leave a lot of kick in there, or a lot of like low, I guess, high, low bass notes. high-lows, whatever. Leave a little bit in there. All right, so now we're going to find that boxiness. So we're going to increase the gain, we're going to increase the Q, and you can click on this little headphone thing, and now we're just going to hear that frequency. Right? No, maybe not. Well, when we click on this, there. So we're going to sweep around. Now you hear that? That would be not pleasing. So now we just want to pull the gain down. Just takes a little bit out of that. We'll grab another one here and increase the gain. Do the same thing. Yeah, usually around 400 is something you want to cut. A massive cut there. So without it, with it, let's bring a little bit more out. Now let's pull up the highs a little bit. Little shimmer. And then I also like to, on a snare drum, add a high cut, and we'll do the same thing. Just take a little bit of that off. So now we've got this. So if we take the EQ off and then put it back on, just a little bit more present. A lot less boxy. There's still a boxy sound in there, so let's grab one more of these guys. We got one more here. It's an EQ8, and let's find where that boxy sound is coming from. I'm gonna say it's about there. Good. And when we're done, you can download this drum rack. It'll all be pre-EQ'd and you can just use it. All right, so now we've got some EQ there. The last thing we want to do is just add a tiny bit of glue compression. Let's grab that glue compressor. And what we're going to do is we're going to set the attack up and we're going to set the release down. I think a 4:1 ratio is good. Yeah, that's probably going to work. Turn the soft clip on. Always turn the soft clip on. And then we'll just bring the threshold down till it's about 5 dB gain reduction. And we'll make up that 5. And unity gain is super important. Gain staging is important. Anything that is louder or perceptibly louder is going to sound, quote, better to your ears, at least initially. So if I were to just turn this up by 1 dB and we listen to this and I put it back in, just sounds better, right? But it sounds better because it's louder, and then you keep stacking louder and louder and louder, and then you end up with this stack of shit at the end, and you're like, why does my mix sound completely weird and flat? It's because you're tickling the limiters in weird ways, and it's just so essentially what you want to do is you want to get unity gain. And the way I do this is super lame. I reset the meter. Not reset the fader, reset the meter. And then I hit play. So we're peaking at minus 3.4. Then I turn the same thing on. I turn it at 0 for now. We're peaking at minus 5.9. So the difference there is, what? Bad at math. 3.5 dB. So let's put this up at 3.5 dB and we'll see if it peaks again, where it peaks again. There it is. So we're effectively at unity gain. I mean, we're about a half dB off to a dB off. So we might want to pull this down a little bit more. But the idea there is you want to make sure that you stay at the same volume. And then you can really hear the effect of that. So now it's really punchy, but it's gluing that sound together, and there it is. So back to the kick drum. Let's go and fix this now. Because that amount of reverb is not going to be good on the drum, on that kick drum. Well, not amount of reverb, but the splattering of it. It sounds nice now, but it's going to wreak havoc during your mix down. Trust me on that. So how do we fix it? So we've got this all tuned up, sounding good. All right. So there's our kick with the gated verb. Now what we want to do is we're going to take, let's quickly EQ it. So let's grab this frequency. We cut it 20 hertz for now is fine. You don't really need anything below 20 hertz because you really can't hear it. Sound systems really can't reproduce it, but it will affect like compressors and limiters later. So you don't want something you can't hear or will never hear to affect your mastering chain. So always cut it minus 20 dB. I actually just set this up. I put the low cut on here, right click on here and click on save as default preset. And then every time I drop it in, I've already got a 20 dB cut or a 20 hertz cut, not dB. Ooh. All right. So here we are. And there's something boxy in there. With and without. A lot more presence. Okay. Back over to here. So now we've got that kick. Now, how do we make it not get sloppy? So first, let's grab a utility. And you may want to put the utility before the EQ8 actually. And bass mono. 120 hertz. Let's bring it up to 100 and I'll bring it up to 200 hertz. 207 is fine. So what this is going to do is it's pretty, I mean, unless you have really good headphones or really good listening like monitors, you really can't hear the difference, but everything here is now mono, including the verb. That reverb is stereo. It's stereo reverb, 100% stereo. We want it to be stereo because we want it to sound big and full and like a room. But if we take this off and we listen, there's a fair amount of stereo audio happening down in that low range. And I think 207 might be a little high. Let's just go down to 160. Yeah, it's better. All right. So that is also going to wreak havoc on subwoofers because subwoofers are almost always 100% mono. So that signal, any sound that could be clashing in the stereo field is going to cancel itself out. It's going to rob it of power. So you want to bass mono that, and that right there will give your subs and your kicks a lot more power on big systems. So bass mono. The other thing we can do is on this verb chain, we have this gate. After the gate, what we can do is actually, we don't even need to do that. We can just, like on the low cut here, pull this low cut up. And now we're low cut at 700. So now there's no verb out below 700. Anyway, yeah. You can also do that with an EQ after the fact if you want. But so the idea here is to make sure that we don't have stereo information below that. And we really don't want reverb below around 500 hertz, because then the reverb makes it sound even more boxy. So now we have this really great kick snare combo. But there you have it. There is how to make the classic retro 80s drum sounds. We just made an LD core. We just modified the LD core kit, all with Ableton stock plugins. And I'm gonna move some stuff around, add this to all the other sounds, just kind of tune it down a little bit to more. And then there will be a link in the description where you can download the drum rack with everything already set up, as well as some of the samples of the sounds. So if you're not using Ableton, but you still want to use that gated sound, I'm going to sample the snare, the kick, and hi-hats, toms, those terrible toms. And yeah, so get the download in the description. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. I'm going to make a bunch more of these. We're going to do some YouTube live streams of making music. I'm going to continue doing the Let's Make Music series. So make sure you subscribe and leave a comment. Tell me what you think. Tell me what I can do better. Thanks.